So I want you to picture a scenario that is, well, it's incredibly common, but just universally agonizing.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
Right. I mean, you're having a perfectly fine day. You're alone. Maybe you're just sipping a coffee, looking out the window, and feeling relatively at peace with your place in the
A
universe.
rare moment of peace, yeah.
Exactly. But then you just absent-mindedly pick up your phone, you open an app, or check your messages, and there it is. A life update from a friend?
The dreaded life update.
Right. They just bought a house, or, they got a massive promotion, or maybe they're moving to some vibrant new city abroad.
And instantly the mood is gone.
Completely gone.
Yeah.
In the span of a single heartbeat, that quiet peace you had just evaporates. It's this crushing, suffocating sense of falling behind that washes completely over you.
Yeah, and suddenly your own life just feels, well, completely inadequate.
Exactly. So today on the deep dive, we are going to look into why that happens, because it's a full body shutdown, isn't it?
It really is. The physiological response to that kind of social information is immediate. It's totally visceral. I mean, we operate under this illusion that our self-esteem is this internal fortress we control.
Like we're the ones guarding the dates.
Right. But the reality of human neurobiology is that our psychological equilibrium is shockingly fragile. We are deeply social creatures.
Right. Because of evolution, basically.
Exactly. We're shaped by evolutionary pressures to constantly scan our environment, and assess where we rank within the tribal hierarchy.
So when you see that update, your brain isn't just seeing text on a screen.
No, not at all. It's processing a perceived shift in social status, and it treats that shift as a direct threat to your own standing.
Which is wild when you really think about it. And I was reading this incredibly raw, deeply introspective essay recently that unpacks this exact phenomenon.
The Hikikomori piece, right?
Yes, exactly. But from a very extreme vantage point. It's written by a former Hikikomori, which is a Japanese term for someone who experiences severe, paralyzing social withdrawal.
Basically becoming a total shut-in.
Right. This author spent the critical years of age 22 to 30 confined almost entirely to a single room.
A whole decade. That's heavy.
It is. They spent a decade grappling with these agonizing feelings of inferiority. And what struck me wasn't just the isolation itself, but how forensic their examination of comparison is.
Oh, they map it out beautifully.
They really do. They treat this mechanism in the mind like an invader, something they actually call the comparison demon.
Which is such a perfect term for it, because the author's isolation acts as this massive magnifying glass.
How do you mean?
Well, when you strip away the daily distractions, going to an office, commuting, running errands, you are left entirely alone with your own cognitive machinery.
You can't hide from yourself.
Right. The author uses this forced introspection to map out exactly how this comparison demon operates. It's a brilliant case study, really.
Because it shows how the human mind traps itself in these inescapable cycles of self-blame.
Exactly. But more importantly, it provides highly specific, almost mechanical strategies for defanging that psychological monster.
Which is the mission for our deep dive today. Because the mechanics of comparison are universal, right?
Oh, absolutely. The intensity might differ from person to person, but the architecture of that sudden, chest-crushing anxiety you feel looking at a friend's highlight reel.
It's the same architecture.
It is identical to what the author experienced in that room.
So I want to establish right out of the gate.
Oh.
For everyone listening, whether you are prepping for a boardroom meeting right now or just navigating everyday life, this applies to you.
No one is immune to it.
No one. And the essay starts with this striking juxtaposition that I think perfectly illustrates this. The author describes these quiet moments sitting in their room, just deeply engaged in abstract philosophical thought.
Right, pondering the grand meaning of life.
Exactly. Questioning their purpose, thinking about mortality. And in those moments, they note that they actually feel okay.
Well, sure. Because when we are in a state of expansive existential thinking, our default mode network shifts.
That's the part of the brain responsible for self-referential thought, right?
Right, and social mapping. So when you are pondering the vastness of the universe or the abstract meaning of existence, your ego is largely quieted.
You're not worrying about your LinkedIn profile when you're thinking about the heat death of the universe.
Exactly. You are temporarily detached from the trivialities of everyday social hierarchies. The mind finds peace because it is looking at the ultimate big picture.
Where individual status markers just mean absolutely nothing.
Right. But, as the author points out, That piece is unbelievably fragile.
Oh, it shatters so easily, and it isn't shattered by an existential crisis or a profound philosophical realization.
No, it's usually something entirely mundane.
It's shattered by a text message. A friend says, I'm having a baby or I'm relocating to London.
Boom. Instantly, all that grand, protective philosophical calm just collapses.
The author calls this sudden intruder the comparison demon, or Hikakuma in Japanese.
Right. And it's described as this silent stalker that lies completely dormant while you are safe in your own abstract thoughts.
But it springs to life the absolute second an external data point is introduced.
The violence of that collapse is just fascinating to me.
Hmm.
Abstract philosophy is safe territory because it lacks a metric.
There's no scoreboard.
Exactly. There is no timeline for understanding the meaning of life, no societal benchmark for how well you are pondering mortality.
You can't be behind schedule on existential dread.
Right. But a friend having a baby? Or moving abroad?
Yeah.
Those are concrete, culturally endorsed milestones.
They have dates, timelines, and perceived societal value attached to them.
And the moment your brain receives that concrete data point, the evolutionary imperative overrides the philosophical calm. The brain just drops the universe and instantly cross-references this new info with your current status.
It's purely relational. The demon doesn't care about your internal growth at all, does it?
Not even a little bit. It only cares about the differential between you and the person who sent the text.
It feels exactly like a sleeper agent in an espionage thriller to me.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Think about it. The comparison demon is embedded deep in your own mind, completely quiet, just blending in with your everyday thoughts. It doesn't cause trouble.
Until it hears the activation code.
Exactly. Someone else's milestone acts as the activation phrase. The trigger, words promoted, engaged, moving, are spoken, and suddenly the agent goes rogue, completely hijacking your cognitive functions.
Why is it that big picture thinking is so easily derailed by a text message, though? The sleeper agent analogy captures the internal nature of the threat perfectly because the call is coming from inside the house.
Right, it's your own brain attacking you.
Yeah. And the author describes the physical sensation of this activation, not just as a passing thought, but as a heavy weight dropping into the chest.
Like a physical blow.
Yes. Psychologically, it acts as a mechanism that forcefully reopens old wounds. The author notes that even when they felt they had moved past the darkest days of their isolation, the news of someone else's forward momentum just instantly tears the scab off.
It's like the amygdala fires, the stress response cascades, and suddenly you are back in the absolute lowest emotional state.
But I think we need to interrogate this evolutionary angle for a second, because I know you listening right now might be wondering this too.
Go ahead.
If our brains are evolved primarily for survival, finding food, avoiding predators, staying warm, why is the psychological reaction to a friend moving to France so catastrophically intense?
Right. It doesn't affect my access to food or shelter. Why does the brain treat someone else's purely social milestone as a DEFCON 1 threat to my own existence?
To understand that, you have to look at how humans survived for the last 200,000 years. We didn't survive by being the strongest or the fastest.
We survive through tribal cohesion.
Exactly. In a hunter-gatherer context, your social status, your perceived value to the group, was directly correlated with your access to resources, mates, and protection.
So if you fell to the bottom of the hierarchy, you were at risk of being ostracized.
Which meant literal death in the wilderness. Fast forward to today, our brains are still running that ancient hardware.
So when you see a peer achieve a major milestone, your brain subconsciously interprets that as them moving up in the tribal hierarchy.
Which inherently threatens your relative position. The comparison demon is really just an outdated survival mechanism misfiring in a modern world.
Where status no longer equals literal survival, but the brain hasn't learned the difference.
Right. The brain is basically sounding a massive alarm for a tiger that just doesn't exist.
I think it's crucial for you, listening to this, to pause and map out your own triggers. What are the specific updates that wake up your personal sleeper agent?
Is it career news? Financial milestones? Relationship statuses? Everyone has their own specific flavor of trigger.
Right, because the essay doesn't just stop at identifying the trigger, it moves into the specific ammunition this demon uses once it's awake.
And for this author, the most devastating ammunition is the burden of the lost decade.
Which is such a heavy concept. The lost decade is where the text becomes agonizingly specific and really taps into a very modern anxiety.
Well, the author spent ages 22 to 30 completely isolated, and in almost every modern culture, your 20s are heavily mythologized.
They're seen as the prime building block years.
Exactly. It's the era of rapid accumulation. You're supposed to be accumulating degrees, job titles, relationships, capital.
There's actually a sociological term for that, right?
Yes, sociologist Bernice Newgarten called this the social clock, the culturally preferred timeline for major life events.
So when you fall completely out of sync with that clock, the psychological friction is just immense.
And the imagery the author uses to describe this friction is haunting. They specifically note the setting, a 4.5 tatami mat room.
Which is tiny. It's confined and static.
Right. And while they were trapped in that box, lying on their backs, staring at the ceiling, they were acutely aware that their classmates were out in the world.
Finding love, climbing the corporate ladder, expanding their lives. The author calls this the stairs of life.
I want you to think about the spatial psychology at play there. You have the author lying flat, staring at a static horizontal plane. The ceiling in a cramped, unchanging space.
Right.
Now contrast that with their peers who are in dynamic motion, moving vertically upstairs, expanding their geographical footprint by moving abroad.
The ceiling represents absolute stagnation, and the stairs represent momentum and societal ascent.
Exactly. The comparison demon forces the author to hold both of these realities in their mind simultaneously, and that creates a paralyzing cognitive dissonance.
And staring at that ceiling, realizing you are stationary while everyone else is climbing, triggers a devastating loop of self-blame.
It's an inescapable loop.
The text notes that when the regret washes over them, it immediately morphs into blaming themselves for doing nothing. But they also admit a terrifying truth. They lack the courage to try anything new.
They know they are stuck. They blame themselves for being stuck, but they are absolutely terrified to move.
This is a textbook description of learned helplessness, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Compounded by the neuroplasticity of rumination.
Can you break that down?
Sure. When you blame yourself repeatedly for your situation, you aren't actually solving the problem. You are just strengthening the neural pathways of guilt and inadequacy in your brain.
So the text explicitly states this dread, the paralyzing fear that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow will be exactly identical to today.
In this state, self-blame isn't a catalyst for change. It's a paralyzing agent. It drains the central nervous system of whatever minuscule amount of energy it might have had to actually take a step.
I love how this source inadvertently dismantles that toxic self-help trope we see everywhere online. You know the one.
Oh, the just get out there and hustle stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Start making excuses. Stop feeling sorry for yourself and just get out there. It implies that self-awareness of your own flaws is the key to action.
But the text points out that knowing your self-blame is useless doesn't actually stop the habit of self-blame.
Right, it's a closed loop. Instead of the cliche car stuck in the mud analogy where you just need to push the gas pedal harder, self-blame operates more like a cognitive autoimmune response.
That is a much more accurate mental model.
Think about it. In an autoimmune disease, the body's immune system is trying to attack a perceived threat, but it ends up attacking healthy tissue.
Right, it misidentifies the target.
Here, the brain recognizes a threat, the fact that you are stagnating. So it sends out a response, which is self-blame, trying to shock you into action.
But instead of fixing the stagnation, the self-blame attacks your healthy tissue, your self-esteem, your motivation, your baseline energy.
Exactly. The harder the brain tries to fix you with guilt, the more degraded and paralyzed your system becomes.
And just like a physical autoimmune response, it becomes chronic. The author recognizes this. They know that continuing to attack the self who did nothing won't change the physical reality of the tatami mat room.
But they note that this habit of blaming is incredibly difficult to break because the brain has practiced it every single day for 8 years.
It is the path of least cognitive resistance. It requires far less energy to mentally beat yourself up than it does to fundamentally alter your behavior.
And I want to remind you, listening, that this applies to everyone, not just someone in a decade of isolation. Almost everyone has a period of their life they wish they could get back.
A relationship they stayed in 5 years too long.
Right, or a career path that was a dead end, or a period of severe depression.
The fear of that wasted time paradoxically causes us to waste even more time.
Because we sit there letting our cognitive autoimmune system destroy our motivation instead of just stepping forward.
Which naturally transitions us to what is arguably the most complex and painful form of comparison in the entire essay.
Moving from external to internal.
Exactly, because while comparing yourself to external actors, your peers climbing the stairs, is painful, it is somewhat abstract.
Right.
It is an entirely different, uniquely agonizing experience to compare yourself to the ghost of who you used to be.
Oh man, the essay shifts from looking outward to looking backward here, and this section hits so hard. The author reflects on their student days, long before the isolation began.
They describe their past self as energetic, acting as a leader, constantly pulling their classmates along.
The introduction of this past self creates a profound identity clash.
Huge. You have the current reality,
Hmm.
the shed-in, isolated in a small room, terrified of tomorrow, paralyzed by an autoimmune loop of self-blame.
And then you have the memory, the energetic, extroverted student leader who seemingly had limitless potential.
The author describes the gap between these two selves as a violent piercing in the chest.
When these two versions of the self collide in the mental arena, the cognitive dissonance is just deafening. It's basically imposter syndrome in reverse.
That's a great way to put it. Usually imposter syndrome is when you achieve a high level of success and you think, I'm a fraud, I don't belong here, someone is going to find me out.
But here, the author is looking at their past success, their past extroversion, and thinking, was that the fraud?
Right? Was the energetic leader, I used to be the imposter, and this struggling, isolated person I am right now, actually my true, inescapable baseline.
The text leans heavily into this doubt. The author wonders if their natural disposition was always that of a shut-in, and if they were merely forcing themselves to project energy and leadership back in school.
This touches on a deeply unsettling aspect of human memory and identity. When we suffer a massive setback or a prolonged period of stagnation, we have a tendency to retroactively rewrite our own history.
We use our current depressed state as a filter.
Exactly. Convincing ourselves that our past successes were flukes, acts of desperation, or just inauthentic performances.
It's a mechanism the brain uses to make sense of the current failure, right?
Yeah.
Like if I was always a fraud, then this current failure makes logical sense.
Yes. To explore this, the author brings up a very raw, specific memory. They recall a moment during their student days when they broke down crying to a teacher, passionately claiming that they wanted to be famous.
Which is such a vulnerable thing to admit.
It is. And this memory serves as the fulcrum for the author's self-discovery. With the wisdom and harsh clarity of the present, the author looks back at that tearful, ambitious declaration and asks a piercing question.
Was that desire to be famous actually genuine ambition? Or was it an immense shield of vanity designed to cover up a deep-seated, agonizing sense of inferiority and anxiety? I want to push back on this a little, though, because I think it's important. Is it always just vanity?
How do you mean?
Couldn't it be that they genuinely had vast potential and life circumstances or mental illness just crushed it? It feels almost too neat to say, oh, my past ambition was just fake vanity.
That's a very fair point.
Isn't there a danger in vilifying the past self just to make the present self feel better?
That is a phenomenal point, and it's the exact tightrope the author is walking.
Yeah.
In Adlerian psychology, there is a concept that people develop superiority complexes.
Like grandiose ambitions, wanting to be famous.
Exactly. Specifically, as a counterbalance to deep feelings of inferiority. The author isn't necessarily saying their potential was fake, but rather that the motivation behind the ambition was rooted in fear, not passion.
I see.
They were speaking in these massive, grandiose terms because they had zero confidence in their everyday, authentic self. The huge words were camouflage for a tiny sense of self-worth.
So by realizing that the extroverted leader was largely a frightened kid hiding behind performative ambition, the author isn't vilifying the past self, they are humanizing it.
Precisely. That makes a lot of sense. It strips away the mythic status of the past.
If the past self wasn't actually this flawless, confident leader, but rather an anxious kid overcompensating, then the gap between the past and the present isn't as wide or as tragic as the comparison demon wants you to believe.
It dismantles the ghost. The author writes that facing these true hidden feelings is a necessary clue to letting go of the comparison habit.
It's the process of memory reconsolidation, isn't it?
Yes. Every time we recall a memory, we pull it out of storage, and when we put it back, we can subtly alter it.
So by pulling out the memory of crying to the teacher and recontextualizing it, not as lost greatness, but as early anxiety, the author fundamentally changes the emotional weight of their own history.
Exactly.
So I invite you to think about your own past ambitions for a moment. The goals you desperately chased 5 or 10 years ago.
Were they driven by a genuine love for the craft, the work, or the goal itself?
Or were they driven by a secret anxiety that you weren't enough and you needed a massive societal trophy to prove to everyone that you mattered?
It's a confronting question for sure.
But it clears the mental real estate for the next crucial phase of the essay, because up until this point, we've just been mapping the trap.
We've identified the trigger, the autoimmune response of self-blame, and the ghost of the past.
Now, the text pivots to the aha moment. The author begins to actively engineer an escape from the 4.5 tatami mat room of their mind.
And the escape route is predicated on a complete paradigm shift regarding how value is measured.
The yardstick.
The yardstick,
Yeah.
exactly. The author comes to the profound realization that comparing their speed of progress to a friend's marriage or an international move is a mathematically rigged game.
It will never, under any circumstances, yield peace.
Therefore, they make a deliberate strategic decision to change the target of comparison entirely.
Instead of comparing themselves to the person next door, they shift the target exclusively to the self of yesterday, or the self of a month ago.
It's the realization that different lives are measured with entirely different yardsticks.
It's like realizing you've been punishing yourself for losing a swimming race when you're actually hanging on a rock climbing wall. The metrics don't align.
That's a great visual.
The person swimming is moving horizontally, moving fast, making a lot of splashes.
Right.
You are moving vertically, incredibly slowly, clinging to a rock face by your fingertips. If you use the swimmer's stopwatch to measure your climbing progress, you will always feel like an absolute failure.
Because it's the wrong tool for the environment.
You have to throw away their stopwatch and look purely at your own chalk marks from yesterday.
The swimmer versus climber analogy highlights the absurdity of external comparison, which is a concept rooted in Goodhart's law.
Remind me what that is.
Goodhart's law states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Society offers us these off-the-shelf metrics: salary, marriage, homeownership.
Right.
But applying those instrumental metrics to your internal psychological recovery is like using a thermometer to measure volume. It is categorically the wrong tool.
I hear that, but I have to challenge the practicality of this. It sounds beautiful in a blog post, but society absolutely uses one yardstick.
In terms of structure, yes.
We live in a capitalist, highly social world. Try telling a hiring manager or a mortgage broker or a potential romantic partner that you were using a quote-unquote different yardstick.
They wouldn't care.
Exactly. You can't just opt out of the world's metrics when you still have to pay rent and function within the society that enforces those metrics. How do you practically ignore the world's ruler?
That is the fundamental friction of modern existence. And the key is distinguishing between instrumental metrics and intrinsic metrics.
Okay, expand on that.
Yes, you have to use the world's yardstick when you apply for a mortgage. That is instrumental. The bank needs a credit score. But the fatal error is allowing that instrumental metric to dictate your intrinsic self-worth.
So the author isn't saying the outside world disappears.
No, they are saying you must fiercely protect your internal evaluation system. The essay is very careful not to romanticize this shift. It emphasizes that changing the yardstick isn't a magical one-time cure.
Right, the author explicitly states that this change in perspective requires relentless, repeated effort.
It is an ongoing, active process of choosing to look away from others and back to oneself, constantly fighting off the demon when it tries to return.
The cognitive load of that constant choosing must be staggering, especially today.
Oh, without a doubt.
The author had to do this while isolated in a room. We have to do this while carrying glowing rectangles in our pockets that have been engineered by thousand-person tech companies to constantly vibrate and notify us about someone else's rock climbing speed.
It's an unfair fight, really.
The algorithms are specifically designed to force external comparison because status anxiety drives engagement.
Which is precisely why the author frames this as a daily battle. You are fighting millions of years of evolutionary programming on one front and billions of dollars of modern algorithmic design on the other.
You have to repeatedly consciously tell your brain, no, we are not using that yardstick today.
Every time the brain's dopamine loops try to grab the swimmer's stopwatch, you have to actively intervene.
It requires a tremendous amount of vigilance, which transitions us perfectly from the abstract philosophical shift to the highly specific granular tactics the author actually deploys to survive this daily warfare.
Because a paradigm shift is great in theory, but how do you operationalize it when you wake up feeling completely hollowed out?
Exactly. Theory is useless without tactics. And this is where the essay becomes an incredible operational manual.
The author implements two major habits to rewire their brain.
The first one is the meticulous measuring of micro-wins. And the author gives a very vulnerable example here.
Right, about getting out of bed.
Yes. They recognize that yesterday, it took them one entire hour of agonizing struggle just to physically get out of bed. But today, it took 30 minutes.
Let's unpack the neuroscience of what is happening there. When someone is severely depressed, isolated, or trapped in that lost decade, The cognitive load of merely existing is massive.
Getting out of bed is not a trivial task for them.
No, it requires overcoming a massive deficit in dopamine and serotonin.
Oh.
By shifting the yardstick strictly to the past self, the author takes an event that society would label as a source of shame, staying in bed for 30 minutes, and turns it into a measurable, undeniable victory.
Going from a 1-hour struggle to a 30-minute struggle is a 50% improvement. Wall Street would kill for those margins.
Exactly. They are hacking their own dopamine prediction error system.
I want to pause there, explain that. What is a dopamine prediction error?
Well, when your brain expects a negative outcome, like, I am a failure who stays in bed, but you reframe the data to highlight an improvement, I got up 30 minutes faster than yesterday, the brain registers a positive surprise.
Okay, so it's beating its own low expectations.
Yes, this is a positive prediction error, and it triggers a small release of dopamine. And dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's the molecule of motivation.
Ah, I see.
So by registering the 30-minute improvement as a win, the author is literally dripping small amounts of motivation back into a depleted system, building the neurochemical momentum needed to get up the next day.
But the friction is that this micro-win completely lacks tribal legibility.
Tribal legibility, right.
Society demands milestones that are easily understood by the group. Moving to Paris is highly legible to the tribe. Getting out of bed 30 minutes faster is not.
You can't post a photo of your alarm clock on Instagram and expect your tribe to validate your progress.
Exactly. The author realizes that if they wait for tribal legibility to feel proud, they will die in that room. Internal momentum has to become its own reward.
Precisely. They have to detach from the need for external validation, which perfectly sets up the second and perhaps most powerful tactic they use, the brain dump.
The author describes taking paper or the memo app on their phone and meticulously writing out all their frustrations, their anxieties, and the specific feelings of being triggered by their friend's news.
Let's spend some time on this because this isn't just keeping a diary.
No, it's very strategic. The author points out that when emotions are kept inside the head, they are formless. They act like a gas, expanding endlessly to fill all available space in your mind, creating this overwhelming atmospheric pressure.
But by writing them down, the author says the emotions gain a clear contour. They take on a physical, defined shape.
Why does that matter so much?
This is actually a cornerstone of cognitive behavioral therapy, specifically a process related to affective labeling. Neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman has done extensive research on this.
What did he find?
When you experience intense anxiety or comparison, your amygdala, the brain's threat center, is firing wildly. But the moment you force yourself to translate those chaotic feelings into structured language, into words on a page, you are forcing the prefrontal cortex to engage.
And the prefrontal cortex is the logical, analytical part of the brain.
Exactly. When it activates to write the words, it acts like a brake on the amygdala. The act of giving the emotion a contour literally downregulates the brain's stress response.
So by writing it down, you are forcing the logical brain to put a leash on the emotional brain.
That's a great way to summarize it. Furthermore, once the emotions have borders, they can be measured and observed objectively.
The author states that by looking back at these written records, they begin to see recurring patterns. They realize, oh, I'm reacting the exact same way to this news that I did last month.
This predictability is a monumental shift. It turns the comparison demon from an invisible, omnipotent monster into a predictable data pattern.
You shift from being a victim of your emotions to a scientist observing your own cognitive weather patterns.
Yes, and the author pairs this scientific observation with a nightly tally of those unglamorous, highly specific micro-achievements.
They literally list them out at night. I did the laundry. I swept a portion of the floor. I sent one single text reply to someone.
Notice the nature of those tasks. Laundry, cleaning, replying to a message. These are the fundamental maintenance tasks of existence.
They are the absolute antithesis of glamorous.
But they represent undeniable physical forward momentum in the real world. By consciously collecting and tallying these tasks at the end of the day, the author is providing hard empirical evidence to their own brain that they possess self-efficacy.
They are building a new neural pathway that says, I am capable of affecting my environment.
It's building a portfolio of undeniable proof against the demon.
Right. So when the comparison demon wakes up and says, you did nothing, you are nothing, you lost a decade, you don't fight it with abstract affirmations.
No affirmations won't work there.
You open your ledger and say, here's the data. I did the laundry. I swept the floor. I replied to the text. I am in motion. It grounds you in reality.
It really does.
So I challenge you, listening to this right now, What is your equivalent of the 30-minute bed escape? What tiny, mundane, utterly unglamorous victory have you completely ignored today just because it wasn't glamorous enough?
Acknowledging that victory isn't self-delusion, it is your strongest neurobiological defense mechanism.
And that brings us to the ultimate synthesis of this journey. We've tracked the author from the violent evolutionary trigger of a friend's success,
Down into the paralyzing autoimmune loop of the lost decade,
through the identity crisis of the past self.
and finally out into the stabilization provided by micro-wins and effective labeling.
It's an incredible roadmap for psychological survival, but what I respect most about the source is its refusal to offer a fairy tale ending.
Oh, totally. It doesn't conclude with the author saying, I changed my yardstick, I did my brain dumps, and I never felt insecure again.
No, the conclusion is brutally, refreshingly realistic. The author's poignant closing thought is an acceptance of the ongoing reality of the human condition.
The comparison demon will never fully disappear.
Never. The old feelings of inferiority, the sudden drops in the chest, will inevitably return with the next piece of news.
The next wedding invitation, the next career update on social media.
But the relationship to the demon has fundamentally changed. The author is no longer a hostage. By utilizing these daily habits, the burden becomes lighter and much more manageable.
There's this beautiful meta moment at the very end of the text.
Yes, the author notes that the very act of writing the blog post we are discussing, the act of putting these thoughts into a structured format, was actively calming their mind in real time.
The tool of giving contour to the anxiety was working as they used it. It is the ultimate proof of concept.
The prefrontal cortex engages, the amygdala quiets down, the contour is drawn, and the panic subsides.
It's just a brilliant illustration of the mechanics of the mind.
So we've unpacked the evolutionary trigger, the autoimmune trap of self-blame, and the daily tactics for survival. But before we finish today, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to just mull over.
Something to take with them.
Exactly, something that builds on the text but flips the camera outward. The author spent years in that 4.5 tatami mat room, tormented by the bright, shining milestones of their peers climbing the stairs of life.
Right.
But consider this. What if the friend who just moved abroad is secretly battling their own comparison demon?
It is highly probable, honestly. The person who just bought the house is looking at the person who just sold a company.
And the person who sold the company is looking at the person who has a fulfilling marriage.
It never ends.
Exactly. What if that friend is sitting in a beautiful cafe in a foreign country, looking entirely inadequate? What if they are feeling like a fraud, terrified that their milestone wasn't enough?
Because the demon thrives entirely on the illusion of asymmetry.
The illusion of asymmetry. Explain that.
The belief that you are uniquely flawed and everyone else is perfectly secure. When you shatter that illusion, the demon loses its primary source of power.
What if the universal, perfect yardstick we are all so deeply terrified of measuring up to simply doesn't exist anywhere except in our collective imaginations?
Once you realize that, the game changes entirely.
So the next time that sleeper agent wakes up in your mind, remember that illusion. Remember that the person you are envying is likely fighting their own ghost.
Take a breath, log your micro-win.
Give your anxiety a contour, and above all else, be kind to your past self today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.